Imagine you are standing at the corner of Mulberry and Worth in Lower Manhattan. It is 1890. The buildings around you lean visibly, some tilting toward the street, others sagging against their neighbors like exhausted men holding each other up. The ground beneath your feet is soft, not soft in the way of a garden, but soft in the way of something that was never meant to be stood on. 80 years ago, this was a lake, a 48-acre freshwater pond called the Collect, the city's drinking water, surrounded by breweries and slaughterhouses that poisoned it until the water turned black. The city filled it in with garbage, rubble, and dirt, and built a neighborhood on top. The fill never settled. The buildings sank, basements flooded with foul groundwater, and methane seeped up through the floors. You are standing in the most dangerous neighborhood in the Western Hemisphere, built on a rotting swamp. 5 streets converge here into a small open space that was once called Paradise Square. There is nothing of paradise about it now. The cobblestones are slick with something that catches the dim gaslight. The air is thick with the smell of open sewage, rotting food, tannery chemicals from the leatherworks nearby, and the sour ferment of brewery waste. Stacked on top of that is the smell of kerosene smoke, drifting from thousands of windowless rooms, horse manure baking in the streets, and the sweet, sickly odor that hangs around buildings where tuberculosis has taken hold. You will not forget this smell. Every visitor who has come here has said the same thing. It hits you like a wall. It is the smell of too many human beings packed into too small a space with no clean water, no sewers that work, and no one in the city government who cares enough to fix it. Look at the buildings. Every window has laundry hanging from it, dripping onto the people below. The glass is broken in most of them, stuffed with rags or newspaper or nothing at all. Iron fire escapes cling to the facades, but people are sleeping on them because the rooms inside are so packed there is no floor space left. The alleys between buildings are barely 3 feet wide. Some have names: Bandit's Roost, Bottle Alley, Kerosene Row, Bone Alley. These are not metaphors. Bandits live in Bandit's Roost. At the entrance to each alley, men stand with their hands in their pockets, watching. No one enters without their permission. The alleys disappear into absolute blackness, and what happens inside them stays inside them. These are rear tenements, buildings behind buildings, rooms behind rooms, a hidden city within a city where the gaslight does not reach and the police do not go. This is the 6th Ward, and the numbers here are staggering. 310 people live on every single acre of ground. In one building alone, the old Coulthard's Brewery on Cross Street, over 1,000 people once packed themselves into 75 rooms and 20 cellars. The average tenement holds 7 families, 34 people, sharing one outdoor privy. In the rear tenements, 1 out of every 5 babies born here will not survive their first year. The Tenement House Committee that investigated this place called those buildings infant slaughterhouses. That is not a journalist's phrase. That is an official government finding. Now listen. The sound of 5 Points is a sound that exists nowhere else on earth. Italian vendors on Mulberry Street calling out prices in Neapolitan dialect. Irish voices arguing from a saloon doorway. The tinny grind of a barrel organ played by an Italian man with a small monkey on his shoulder collecting coins. Children calling from every direction. Newsboys hawking papers, bootblacks offering to shine your shoes. Somewhere a woman is calling down from a 4th-floor window to a pushcart vendor in the street below. Underneath it all, from every direction, the sound that never stops. A deep, wet, rattling cough. Tuberculosis. The disease of the tenements, bred in dark, airless rooms and passed from lungs to lungs in spaces where 12 people sleep in a room built for 2. You will hear that cough in every hallway, on every staircase, behind every closed door. It is the sound of 5 Points breathing. Walk deeper into the neighborhood, into the curve of Mulberry Street that everyone calls the Bend, the most notorious stretch of pavement in America. The buildings close in overhead, upper floors jutting out, nearly touching, turning the street below into a canyon of shadow. The gas light barely reaches here. You navigate by the faint orange glow of kerosene lamps behind broken windows and the occasional shaft of light from a saloon door swinging open. The cobblestones are wet and uneven under your feet. The walls on either side are damp to the touch, sweating moisture that has been rising from the old lake bed below since the day they were built. This is where the Italian immigrants live now, packed into rooms that the Irish left behind when they could finally afford to escape. Families of 10 in a single room, 12 feet by 12 feet. No windows, no running water. A kerosene lamp for light and a cast iron stove for heat and cooking. Clothes hanging on lines strung wall to wall. Children sleeping on chairs pushed together or on straw spread across the floor. And at a table in the center, by the light of that single lamp, a woman sewing because the garment work never stops. Artificial flowers, shirt collars, trouser hems. Paid by the piece, a fraction of a cent per piece, 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if she stops, her children do not eat. The people who live here come from everywhere. This is one of the most remarkable things about 5 Points and one of the least remembered. Irish famine refugees who arrived in the 1840s and 50s, their children and grandchildren still here, 40 years later. Italians from Naples and Sicily arriving in waves through the 1880s, filling Mulberry Street with pushcarts and the smell of garlic and olive oil. Jewish families from Eastern Europe, fleeing violence, working as peddlers and tailors. A Chinese community centered on Mott and Pell and Doyers Streets, one of the first in America. And African Americans, free black families who have lived alongside the Irish here since the 1830s, sharing tenements in one of the only racially integrated neighborhoods in the entire country. Here in 5 Points, Irish and black families live in the same buildings, on the same floors, and something extraordinary has happened. Irish step dancing has met African dance, and together they have created something the world has never seen before, a new art form that will eventually be called tap dance. But 5 Points is also the birthplace of something darker, the organized street gang, the 40 thieves in the 1820s, the dead rabbits in the 1850s who carried their namesake on a pike and wore red, stripes on their trousers. And now, in 1890, the gang that controls these streets is called the Wyos, named for their distinctive whistling war cry. When a member named Piker Ryan was arrested in 1884, the police found a price list in his pocket. Punching, $1. Both eyes blacked, $3. Nose and jaw broken, $7. And at the bottom of the list, doing the big job, $100. Both Wyos leaders, Danny Driscoll and Danny Lyons, were hanged in 1888. But the vacuum they left behind is already being filled by a new organization, the 5 Points Gang, led by an Italian named Paul Kelly, an army of 1,500 men who will eventually produce two names that the entire world will know. Step into a saloon, down 3 worn stone steps below street level, into a low-ceilinged room thick with tobacco haze. A wooden bar along one wall, sawdust on the floor, kerosene lamps on the walls casting yellow circles of light. Dock workers, laborers, gang members, and women who work the crowd. A card game in the corner, someone sleeping with his head on a table. A plate of free lunch at the end of the bar, bread and pickled eggs and sausage, yours with a 5-cent beer. Through a back door, the rattle of dice. There are 116 establishments like this one in the 6th Ward alone. That is one saloon for every 50 people. These are not just drinking places. They are hiring halls, meeting rooms, political clubhouses, and banks where men cash their wages. They are the living rooms that the tenements do not have, the only places where a working man can sit in a chair that is not also someone else's bed. Now follow a man with a camera. It is 1888, and a Danish immigrant named Jacob Riis has been covering 5 Points as a police reporter for years. He has seen everything, but he has realized that words alone are not enough. Nobody who has not stood in these alleys can imagine what they look like. So Reese has taught himself photography, and he is carrying something new, a device that ignites magnesium powder to create a blinding flash of light. For the first time in history, someone can photograph the inside of a tenement room, the interior of a rear alley, the face of a child sleeping on a steam grate. Reese walks into Bandit's Roost, into the narrow 6-foot-wide passage between blackened brick walls, aims his camera at the men lounging against the walls, and fires the flash. The photograph he takes will become one of the most famous images in American history. And when Reese publishes his book, How the Other Half Lives, in 1890, America will see 5 Points for the first time, and it will not look away. A man reads that book and leaves his card at Reese's office. The note says, "I have read your book and I have come to help." His name is Theodore Roosevelt, and in 1895 he becomes New York City's police commissioner. Roosevelt walks these streets at midnight with Reese beside him, catching officers sleeping on duty, confronting the corruption that has allowed 5 Points to fester for decades. He closes the police station lodging houses where the homeless sleep in basement filth. He enforces housing laws that have been on the books for years but never applied. And in 1897, the city demolishes Mulberry Bend, the worst tenement houses in the world, an official report calls them, and they are torn down and replaced with a park designed by the same man who designed Central Park. But here is the thing about 5 Points that the reformers never solved. You can tear down the buildings, you can demolish Mulberry Bend and plant trees where Bandit's Roost once stood. But you cannot demolish poverty. The families who lived here scattered to other neighborhoods, other tenements, other versions of the same desperate arithmetic. Too many people, too little space, too few jobs that paid enough to live on. The Tenement House Act of 1901 outlawed the worst building designs and required indoor plumbing and windows in every room. It was the most significant housing reform law in American history. And it was 50 years too late for the people who had already lived and suffered and raised children and buried children in 5 Points. Today, if you stand at the corner of Worth and Baxter, you are standing in 5 Points. There is nothing to tell you that. No plaque, no marker, no memorial. The streets were renamed. The buildings were torn down. Where Mulberry Bend once curved through the most notorious stretch of pavement in America, there is a park called Columbus Park, where elderly Chinese residents practice Tai Chi in the morning and children play on swings in the afternoon. It is a beautiful park. It is built on a swamp filled with garbage on top of a poisoned lake in a neighborhood that once held more human suffering per square foot than any place on the continent. 310 people per acre. 1 in 5 babies gone before their first birthday. The neighborhood that invented tap dance and organized crime in the same generation. It turned out that the most dangerous place in America was not a frontier town or a battlefield. It was a city block in Lower Manhattan, and the people trapped inside it were not outlaws. They were immigrants, they were families, they were the other half, and for 100 years, nobody bothered to look.